The credit card notification pinged on my phone at 2:47 a.m. $143 at some trendy cocktail bar downtown. While I was sleeping before another 12-hour shift, my wife Melissa was out burning through money like it was Monopoly cash. But this wasn't just another expensive night out. This was the final piece of evidence I needed. I screenshot that notification and added it to the spreadsheet I'd been building for 2 months. Transaction after transaction, receipt after receipt, building an airtight case that would change everything. Because what Melissa didn't know was that her next girls' night would trigger the most expensive education of her life. See, 3 days earlier, she'd looked me dead in the eye after I asked her to spend one evening at home together, and said those words that would haunt our marriage. "Your needs aren't my responsibility, Connor. I have my own life to live." My own life to live. As if the man working 60-hour weeks to fund that life was just some ATM machine with legs. Well, she was about to discover exactly what her independent life looked like when I stopped being responsible for funding it. But it wasn't just the emotional distance. The woman who used to greet me with genuine affection had become a stranger who treated physical intimacy like a chore to be avoided. "I'm too tired tonight," had become her default response to any attempt at connection. Too tired after spending 3 hours at book club. Too tired after a day of photography classes. Too tired after shopping with friends. But never too tired for girls' nights that lasted until 2 a.m. The next morning, I watched her drag herself into our kitchen at 11:30 a.m., makeup smeared, still wearing last night's dress, scrolling through photos of her adventures while I sat there in my work clothes, coffee getting cold. She didn't even look up, didn't say good morning, didn't acknowledge that her husband existed. "Brittany's planning a wine-tasting weekend in Napa," she announced. Not asked, announced. "It's only $400 for the weekend, and honestly, I deserve this after how stressful things have been." Stressful. The woman who worked part-time at a boutique for 20 hours a week was talking about stress while I was pulling overtime to keep us afloat. "Sounds fun," I replied, making notes on my phone. She thought I was checking work emails. I was actually opening a new spreadsheet titled Project Independence. That afternoon, while she was at her book club that spent more time discussing wine than literature, I started my comprehensive audit. Not just tracking her spending, documenting the entire infrastructure of her lifestyle that I'd built and maintained without recognition. Every bill I paid that enabled her freedom. Every service I provided that she took for granted. Every convenience I handled so she could focus on her priorities. The numbers told a story that would make any reasonable person sick. Her monthly lifestyle costs exceeded most people's mortgage payments. The premium gym membership she used twice a month, $170. The organic meal delivery service that saved her from the burden of grocery shopping, $250 monthly. The photography classes she attended sporadically, $150 per session. The weekly mani-pedi appointments, $80. The premium streaming services for her daily background entertainment, $65 combined. But the real revelation was tracking her time. For someone who claimed my needs weren't her responsibility because she was too busy living her life, she had remarkable amounts of time for everything except her marriage. Monday, 3-hour lunch with girlfriends, followed by shopping that lasted until dinner. Tuesday, yoga class that somehow turned into a 2-hour coffee session about everyone's relationship problems except ours. Wednesday, photography workshop that produced 0 photos but generated plenty of Instagram stories about finding herself. Thursday, book club where they discussed everything except books, followed by drinks that stretched past midnight. Friday, prep time for weekend plans that never included me. Every single day, a new priority that didn't include the man funding it all. Monday morning, she announced her next expensive adventure, a photography workshop that cost $200. "I'm really finding myself through creative expression," she said, applying makeup for her 10 a.m. departure. "This is important for my personal growth." Personal growth on my credit card. Again. "Absolutely," I said, making another note. Personal growth is crucial. I spent that day at the construction site, calculating exactly how many hours of dangerous, back-breaking work it took to fund her journey of self-discovery. Each nail I hammered, each beam I lifted, each cut I made with power tools that could take my fingers off, all so she could find herself on my dime. The math was depressing and infuriating. Tuesday brought my first strategic move. While she was at her extended yoga-turned-coffee session, I made a series of phone calls that would reshape our entire dynamic. First, I contacted our bank and credit card companies, not to cancel anything yet, but to set up spending alerts for any purchase over $50 on her cards. I wanted real-time notifications of every expense. Knowledge was power, and I was about to become very powerful. Next, I logged into every subscription service and membership account that I'd been automatically paying for. The list was staggering. 15 different monthly charges, ranging from streaming services to beauty boxes to fitness apps she'd used exactly once. Then I started documenting the services I provided personally. Every morning, I ensured her car had gas and was clean. I handled all household maintenance, bill paying, appointment scheduling, and problem solving. I was her personal assistant, IT department, and financial manager rolled into one convenient package. Most importantly, I began tracking something she'd never considered: the opportunity cost of my time. Every hour I spent managing her life was an hour I couldn't spend on my own interests, career development, or basic relaxation. By Tuesday evening, I had a complete picture of our relationship's financial reality. She was consuming resources at an unsustainable rate, while contributing almost nothing to the infrastructure that made her lifestyle possible. That's when it hit me. I wasn't just her husband. I was the entire infrastructure that made her lifestyle possible. Every girl's night, every spontaneous purchase, every moment of independence was built on a foundation I'd constructed and maintained. Remove the foundation and the whole fantasy collapses. She thought she was living independently, while I was the invisible support system making independence possible. Time to make the invisible visible. She'd compartmentalized our marriage into what benefited her and what didn't. My financial support, essential. My household management, required. My emotional needs, irrelevant. My physical needs, inconvenient. I was supposed to be available as a provider and problem solver, but not as a husband who needed connection and intimacy. Wednesday morning brought the meal delivery crisis she didn't see coming. She stood in our kitchen staring at the empty refrigerator like it had personally betrayed her. "Where's our HelloFresh delivery?" she asked, genuine confusion in her voice. "I canceled it yesterday." She turned slowly, confusion replacing her usual dismissive attitude. "You canceled it? Why?" "Because when I told you I needed more consideration in our marriage, you said my needs weren't your responsibility. So I decided your meal preferences weren't mine." "That's completely different." "Oh." She opened her mouth, then closed it again. Logic is hard to argue with when you're the one who set the precedent. "I have plans with Madison tonight. I don't have time to grocery shop." Sounds like you'll need to prioritize. The beautiful thing about this approach was its perfect symmetry. She'd established that my needs weren't her responsibility. I was simply applying the same standard to her needs and my responsibilities. Wednesday evening brought my first real moment of satisfaction. She tried to pay for drinks with her girlfriends, and her card was declined. The panicked phone call came at 9:15 p.m. "There's something wrong with my credit card," she hissed, clearly trying not to let her friends hear her humiliation. "Did you check your available balance?" "I don't need to check that stuff. You handle all the money details. I handle our joint household expenses. Your entertainment budget is your responsibility to manage." "My entertainment budget? These are my friends, and they're your priority to fund." The silence stretched for 10 seconds before she hung up. I could picture her standing outside some overpriced cocktail bar, probably making excuses to friends who were wondering why the woman with the successful husband couldn't afford a round of drinks. Thursday morning brought the performance I'd been expecting. She appeared in the silk robe I'd bought her for Christmas, crawled into bed while I was checking emails, and started the routine that used to reset every argument. The same woman who'd been too tired for intimacy for weeks was suddenly ready to use her sexuality as a negotiation tool. Physical affection wasn't something she wanted to share. It was something she deployed strategically when she needed something. "Baby," she whispered, pressing against me, "I know you're upset, but punishing me like this isn't solving anything." I gently moved her aside and continued typing. "Connor?" Confusion replaced seduction. "What are you doing?" "Checking our monthly expenses. Did you know your lifestyle costs more than my entire take-home pay?" The robe came off. Not in a sexy way, in a defeated way. "This feels like punishment. This feels like consequences. There's a difference. Punishment involves suffering for past behavior. Consequences involve natural results of current choices. You chose to declare my needs irrelevant. I'm choosing to treat yours the same way." Thursday afternoon brought another strategic cancellation. Her premium gym membership, the CrossFit place, that charged $170 monthly for classes she attended twice if we were lucky. When they called about payment, I let them know she'd handle her own billing going forward. The next day, I watched her try to explain to her fitness-obsessed friend Sarah why she couldn't join their workout session. The look of confusion when Melissa mumbled about budget constraints was worth every hour of overtime I'd worked to fund her previous lifestyle. The beautiful thing about my strategy was its psychological precision. I wasn't punishing her, I was educating her. Every inconvenience she faced was a lesson in the real cost of independence. Every humiliation was a mirror reflecting her own behavior back at her. If you're nodding along with Connor's systematic approach, hit that subscribe button. This gets much better. But what I discovered in our joint savings account that night would make everything else look like child's play. She'd been hiding something that would either end our marriage immediately or give me the ultimate leverage I needed. Friday brought the gym membership crisis. She got the call during her book club and came home absolutely furious. "You canceled my gym?" she screamed the moment she walked through the door. "I removed my payment authorization. If fitness is your priority, you can prioritize paying for it." "I can't afford that on my part-time salary." "Then maybe it's not actually a priority. You know I need that gym for my mental health. And you know I need consideration in our marriage for mine. Apparently we're both dealing with unmet needs now." She stared at me like I'd grown a second head. The man who had spent 3 years automatically solving every problem in her life was suddenly expecting her to solve her own. Saturday morning, she tried a different strategy. Tears. She came downstairs in her pajamas, eyes red and puffy, clutching a tissue. "I feel like you don't love me anymore," she sobbed over her coffee. "You're being so cold and controlling. I'm being exactly as considerate of your needs as you are of mine." "That's not fair." "You're right. It's not fair that I've been funding a lifestyle for someone who treats me as irrelevant to her happiness." The tears dried up quickly when she realized they weren't working. She'd probably spent an hour working herself up to this performance, and I'd neutralized it in 30 seconds with simple logic. "You used to care about making me happy. I used to think making you happy was compatible with my own happiness. You've shown me otherwise." Saturday evening brought her first real panic. She'd planned to meet friends at an expensive restaurant downtown, assuming her card would work. It didn't. The humiliation of having her payment declined in front of her social circle triggered a meltdown that was both predictable and satisfying. "I was humiliated," she screamed when she got home. "Everyone was staring while I tried to figure out how to pay." "Did you check your account balance before ordering?" "I shouldn't have to check. You've never made me worry about money before." "I've never been told my needs were irrelevant before either." Apparently, we're both experiencing new things. This is ridiculous. We're married. You can't just cut me off. "I'm not cutting you off. I'm treating your financial needs with the same priority you assign to my emotional ones." Sunday brought the family reinforcements she'd obviously called for backup. Her sister Madison called first, armed with concern and misinformation. "Connor, I'm really worried about you guys. Melissa says you're going through a tough financial situation. We're working through some relationship issues. She mentioned you've had to cut back on a lot of things because of money problems." Money problems. That's how she'd spun it to her family. Not that she'd declared my needs irrelevant, but that we were struggling financially. Madison, did Melissa tell you she said my needs weren't her responsibility? Long pause. She said you guys disagreed about spending time together. Ask her directly if she told me my needs weren't her responsibility. Ask her to repeat those exact words. Then call me back if you want to continue this conversation. The call never came. Monday brought her mother, armed with guilt and 30 years of experience manipulating men. Connor, I raised my daughter to expect better treatment from her husband. Mrs. Rodriguez, what specifically about my treatment concerns you? Melissa says you're controlling her spending and won't let her see her friends. Did she mention that she declared my needs weren't her responsibility? She said you had an argument about spending time together. If your husband told you that your needs weren't his responsibility, how would you respond? Long pause. I could hear the wheels turning as she processed the implications. I'd be very hurt. And if he continued expecting you to fund his lifestyle while treating you as optional in his daily life? Another pause, longer this time. I suppose I'd want him to understand that actions have consequences. Exactly. The conversation ended shortly after that, but I could tell the seed of doubt had been planted. Melissa's version of events didn't hold up to scrutiny when people learned the actual facts. Her mother called me back 3 days later. Connor, I had a long talk with Melissa about what she actually said to you. I owe you an apology. If my husband had told me my needs weren't his responsibility, I would have been devastated. The truth was spreading faster than her lies. Tuesday brought her younger sister Kara, clearly coached and probably promised something in return for her intervention. Melissa's been crying every day, Kara said, her voice dripping with practiced concern. She says you've become mean and distant. Has she explained why I might be less accommodating lately? She said you're going through a midlife crisis or something. Midlife crisis. I was 32 years old and had never been more clear about what I wanted from life. Kara, ask Melissa if she told me my needs weren't her responsibility. Ask her to repeat those exact words to you. Then we can talk about who's really being mean and distant. These family intervention calls were revealing something crucial. Melissa was systematically lying about what had happened. She was painting herself as the victim of an unreasonable husband, while conveniently omitting the part where she'd declared me irrelevant to her life. Wednesday brought the most interesting call yet. Her brother Miguel, who I'd always respected, approached me at the hardware store with obvious reluctance. Look, Connor, I don't usually get involved in this stuff, but the whole family's worked up about what's happening with you and Mel. I'm sure they are. What's the official family position? That you're being unreasonable and maybe a little controlling. Ask me anything you want to know. I'll give you completely honest answers. Okay, why won't you pay for her to go out with friends anymore? Because when I asked for consideration and attention in our marriage, she told me my needs weren't her responsibility, so I decided her social life wasn't mine. He stopped walking and stared at me like I'd just revealed classified information. She actually said that to you? Word for word. Your needs aren't my responsibility, Connor. I have my own life to live. Damn, man, that's cold. And I'm supposed to keep funding that life while being told I'm irrelevant to it? He shook his head slowly. Honestly, Connor, I'd have done a lot worse than cancel some subscriptions. The goal isn't revenge, it's education. Her sister Madison called back the next evening. Connor, I asked Melissa directly about what she said to you. When she repeated those words, your needs aren't my responsibility, I honestly couldn't believe it. I told her she should be grateful you didn't file for divorce immediately. Smash that like button if you think Connor's handling this the right way. Thursday evening brought the first crack in her armor. She'd been managing her own problems for 2 weeks, and the experience was clearly educational in ways she hadn't anticipated. I had to call customer service 3 times today, she complained, collapsing onto the couch with obvious exhaustion. The internet company, the cable provider, and the car insurance. It took hours. Welcome to the world of personal responsibility. You used to handle all that boring stuff. I used to handle everything while you pursued your priorities. Now you can handle your own priorities directly. She looked genuinely confused, like she was discovering for the first time that all the conveniences in her life didn't just happen automatically. The infrastructure of comfort that I'd built around her was becoming visible only now that it was gone. "It's so time-consuming," she continued. "I don't understand how people manage all these details. Most people manage their own lives instead of delegating everything to someone they treat as irrelevant." Friday brought my favorite moment yet. She'd planned another expensive dinner with friends, assuming her card would work this time. When it was declined again, the panic call came exactly when I expected it. "Connor, I'm humiliated again," she hissed from the restaurant bathroom. "My card isn't working, and everyone's starting to ask questions." "What questions are they asking?" "About whether we're having financial problems or if something's wrong with our marriage." "Interesting. What are you telling them?" "I don't know what to tell them. This is embarrassing." "Have you considered telling them the truth? That you declared your husband's needs irrelevant and he responded by treating yours the same way?" "I can't say that." "Why not?" "Because it makes me sound terrible." "That's because it was terrible. You're experiencing the social consequences of your choices. So you're just going to let me be humiliated in front of my friends? I'm letting you the natural results of your decisions. If you can't afford dinner at a restaurant that charges $35 for an entree, maybe you shouldn't be eating there." Week 3 brought escalation as she realized that waiting me out wasn't working. She'd obviously been strategizing because Saturday morning, she tried the nuclear option, threatening to leave. "Maybe we should consider separation," she announced over breakfast, clearly expecting me to panic and apologize. "If that's what you want, I can have papers drawn up by Monday." The color drained from her face completely. This wasn't the response she'd expected. In her mind, threatening to leave would trigger desperate attempts to win her back. You'd actually divorce me?" "I'd divorce someone who treats me as irrelevant while expecting me to fund their lifestyle. Wouldn't you divorce someone who used you as an ATM while dismissing your needs?" She stared at me like she was seeing me for the first time. The man who had spent 3 years avoiding conflict and automatically giving her whatever she wanted had been replaced by someone who valued himself enough to set boundaries. "I didn't think you'd actually call my bluff." "I'm not bluffing about anything. I'm just no longer accepting unacceptable treatment. If you think our marriage is worth saving, you'll need to demonstrate that. If you don't, we can make this separation permanent." Sunday brought immediate damage control mode. She spent the entire day cleaning the house for the first time in months, making an elaborate dinner, and generally acting like the wife I'd married instead of the entitled roommate she'd become. "I made your favorite," she said, setting down a plate of perfectly cooked steak with all the sides I actually enjoyed. "Thank you. This is really nice. I've been thinking about what you said yesterday, about needs and responsibilities." I waited for her to continue, curious about which direction this conversation would take. "Maybe I could try to be more considerate of your needs." "Maybe? I will try to be more considerate." It was a start, but I wasn't ready to declare victory. 3 weeks of consequences had produced the beginning of awareness, but real change would require more time and consistency. Week 4 brought the real test of her commitment to change. She'd burned through most of her own money trying to maintain her lifestyle and was finally confronting the hard mathematics of independence. Her photography equipment, barely used despite the expensive classes, was now listed on Facebook Marketplace. The designer handbags she'd accumulated were being sold on consignment. Her expensive skincare routine had been replaced with drugstore alternatives that worked just as well for a fraction of the cost. Most telling of all, she'd started doing household tasks she'd previously considered beneath her dignity. Laundry that actually got folded and put away. Meal planning that considered our budget and my preferences. Cleaning that involved actually scrubbing things instead of just moving them around. "The dishwasher's making a weird noise," she mentioned Tuesday evening. "Did you call the repair service?" "I thought maybe you could look at it first, to save money on a service call." There it was. The woman who'd spent months delegating everything to me while declaring my needs irrelevant was now asking for help to save our money. I can take a look, I said carefully. But going forward, household maintenance needs to be something we handle together as partners. Together? Like married people do. Both contributing, both responsible, both invested in the outcome. Wednesday brought another attempt at family pressure, but this time the dynamics had shifted. Her cousin Stephanie called, clearly having received a different version of events than the earlier family members. "Connor, I heard you and Melissa are working through some things." "We are." "She mentioned that she's been making some changes to be more considerate of your needs in the marriage." "Interesting." Now she was telling people she was making changes, rather than painting me as the villain. "That's accurate. We're both working on better communication and mutual respect." "Good for you guys. Marriage is hard work, but it's worth it when both people are committed." The fact that she was now telling family members she was making changes rather than claiming I was being unreasonable showed a fundamental shift in her understanding of the situation. Thursday brought the conversation I'd been waiting for. She asked if we could talk seriously about our marriage. "I think I'm starting to understand," she began, sitting across from me at our kitchen table with no makeup, hair in a simple ponytail, looking more like the woman I'd married than she had in years. "Tell me what you understand. What it feels like to have someone dismiss your needs as unimportant." "Go on." "When my friends started making plans without checking if I could afford to join, I realized how it felt to be an afterthought in relationships I valued." This was progress. She was connecting her experience to mine rather than just complaining about consequences. "When I had to start handling all the things you used to do automatically, calling service companies, managing appointments, budgeting for basic expenses, I understood how much I'd been taking for granted." She paused, clearly struggling with what came next. "And when I actually looked at our bank statements and saw how much my lifestyle was costing compared to what I was contributing, I realized how selfish and entitled I'd become." "What specifically changed your perspective?" "Reality. Living without your automatic support showed me that my independence was completely artificial. I wasn't an independent woman living my best life. I was a dependent wife whose husband was subsidizing her fantasy of independence." For the first time in months, she was looking at me with something resembling respect and genuine remorse. "I was wrong about everything," she continued. "My needs aren't more important than yours. Telling you that your needs weren't my responsibility was cruel and unfair. And expecting you to fund my lifestyle while treating you as irrelevant was selfish beyond belief." Subscribe right now if you want to see how this story ends, because what she was about to confess would either rebuild our marriage on solid ground or prove that everything I'd fought for was already too late to save. What does that mean for our marriage going forward? I want to fix this, but I know that words aren't enough after what I've put you through. She reached for a folder she'd brought to the table. Inside were printouts showing she'd canceled subscriptions I hadn't even targeted yet, started contributing significantly more of her income to household expenses, and cleared her social calendar for the next month to focus on our relationship. I want to rebuild this marriage as actual partners instead of you subsidizing my lifestyle while I ignore yours. What about your friends, your social circle that was so important to your personal growth? I learned some hard truths about those relationships. Most of them were pretty shallow and disappeared the moment I couldn't afford to keep up financially. The real friends stuck around and actually respected me more when I started being honest about needing to budget and prioritize my marriage. She looked directly at me with clear eyes. I also learned that I'd been treating the most important relationship in my life worse than I'd treat a casual acquaintance. That's not the kind of person I want to be. The transformation seemed genuine, but I'd learned not to trust quick changes or dramatic declarations. This sounds promising, but I need you to understand something crucial. I'm not going back to being taken for granted. I'm not going back to having my needs dismissed as irrelevant, and I'm definitely not going back to funding a lifestyle for someone who treats me as optional in their daily life. I understand completely, and honestly, I wouldn't want you to go back to that. The man who allows himself to be treated that way isn't the man I want to be married to. Do you really understand? Because a month ago you were mobilizing your entire family to pressure me into accepting disrespect and financial exploitation. It took losing everything I thought I wanted to realize what I actually needed. Which is a husband who respects me enough to expect respect in return. A partner who won't enable me to become entitled and selfish. A man who values himself enough to set boundaries and enforce them. The irony wasn't lost on me. By refusing to accept being treated as irrelevant, I'd apparently become more attractive to her than I'd been in years. So where do we go from here? I'd like to start over. Not pretend the last few months didn't happen, but use them as a foundation for building something better. I studied her face carefully, looking for signs of manipulation or performance. But the exhaustion in her eyes, the genuine humility in her voice, and the concrete actions she'd already taken suggested this might actually be real change. All right, but we do this with complete transparency about everything. No more assumptions about who pays for what or handles what. Everything gets discussed and agreed upon as partners. Yes, no more taking my contributions for granted or treating my needs as optional. Never again. And if you ever again decide that my needs aren't your responsibility, this will be our last conversation about staying married. I understand, and I hope you know that will never happen again. I've learned what life looks like when the person I love treats me the way I was treating you. It's miserable and unsustainable. We'll see. Change is proven over time, not promised in conversations. 10 months later, we have a marriage that's actually built on mutual respect and genuine partnership. Melissa contributes equally to household expenses and takes full responsibility for her own financial choices. Her social life is balanced with our relationship instead of competing with it. She handles her share of household management and actually considers my needs when making plans. Most importantly, she treats me with the same consideration and respect she expects to receive. The transformation wasn't just behavioral, it was philosophical. She'd gone from "your needs aren't my responsibility" to "how can I show you that you matter?" The woman who'd treated me like an ATM was now treating me like a partner she was grateful to have. The woman who'd been too tired for genuine intimacy for months was now initiating connection without agenda. Not as manipulation, but as genuine affection from a wife who finally understood that physical and emotional intimacy were part of the partnership she'd been neglecting. 6 months into our recovery, she thanked me for not giving her what she thought she wanted. "You saved our marriage by refusing to enable my worst behavior," she said. "The woman I was becoming would have destroyed everything we built." But the real victory wasn't changing her behavior. It was refusing to accept unacceptable treatment and showing her the true cost of her choices. Sometimes the best education you can give someone is letting them experience exactly what they asked for. When someone tells you that your needs aren't their responsibility, the most powerful response is to treat their needs with the same level of priority. Not as punishment, but as natural consequences of the standard they established. Sometimes the greatest act of love is letting someone experience the full weight of their choices. If this story resonated with you, subscribe for more content about building relationships based on mutual respect instead of one-sided sacrifice. The comments section is full of men who faced similar situations. Share your experience below. You're not alone in this fight for respect in your relationships. I've selected 2 more videos that dive deeper into these relationship dynamics and provide advanced strategies for maintaining respect in marriage. Click on them when you're ready to take your understanding to the next level. Remember, you can't negotiate attraction, but you can absolutely demand respect. And sometimes the only way to get it is to stop accepting anything less. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you in the next story.